The talk is about 45 minutes in total, and then we're going to have some time for questions afterwards, which is the bit I love. So start thinking of all the great questions as we go along. But I like to start my talk with a question. And the question is, how do you want to be remembered? And just for a moment, I'd like you to fast forward to the end of your life. And a crowd has gathered, and they're talking about you. How you've lived, how you've loved, how you've played. And just pause a minute and be there. I do this regularly for myself, at least every 6 months, because our days, our weeks, our months, and the years fly by. And you get to a certain stage in your life and you look back and you think, where did that go? So pause when you can to reflect where you are, what you're doing, and where you want to be. Now, for the past 15 years, I've been a frontline humanitarian worker. And I've had the honour of working in Asia, in Africa, and in South America. I've been in the deserts of the Sahara, to the high Himalayas in Tibet, and to the jungles of Peru. I've also had the opportunity to assist in the recovery of many catastrophic disasters. The Asian tsunami, I was there for 2.5 years. The Pakistan earthquake, for 2 years. Most recently, the typhoon, 2 super typhoons that happened in the Philippines. And now I'm about to run to Nepal to help the recovery after the earthquake there. So it's quite an action-packed life I've had. But what does it mean to really be a frontline worker? Well, it means that to save a life, I've sat with a Tibetan medicine doctor high in the Himalayas, and I've drunk urine, which is 3 days old. Wearing the moccasins of the community, because there in Tibet, that is their only way of diagnosing. They don't have all the high-tech stuff we have here in our hospitals. So they use their taste buds to actually diagnose an illness. But along the way, I've had the most amazing teachers. I've been very lucky. People like Sir Richard Branson, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I can see you all thinking, Richard Branson, there she is in the Caribbean, she's on a hammock, she's got a cocktail in one hand, and they're discussing life. Oh no. I met Richard Branson in Soweto, which is a slum area outside of Johannesburg in South Africa. And we quickly got to know each other because I was holding the toilet door for him when we both had a funny tummy. Richard Branson is a tremendous humanitarian, and I learnt a lot working alongside him and for him. But really, the gentleman that gave me my model of success for my last 15 years was His Royal Highness Prince Charles. And he came to visit me in a refugee camp just outside of Delhi, full of Tibetans. And he had heard that I was using a different type of model to uplift the community. And what I'd realised that what we were lacking as we were trying to help them in the charitable world were people like you. Because basically, often charities will come to people like you or to business leaders, and there really is quite a simple ask. And that is, please, will you donate? Will you give us some money to be able to help on the front line, wherever the problems are? But I said to Prince Charles, I believe that the most underused resource in the development world are business leaders and people who have their daily lives, who are working in construction, who are working in many different fields. And we are missing out on them. And he said, I totally agree. And when someone tries to give you some money to help you on the front line, don't refuse it. Leave that check on the table. And then see if there's any way you can engage them as a person. Because what really you want is their business acumen, their entrepreneurial skills. You want their creativity and their innovation. That is the jewel. You want to engage them with their heart and their soul. The money's always good. But getting that person involved and all the skills they have, especially if you're fortunate enough as we are to be born into a first world country, just our common sense, the way we manage our bank accounts, the way we organise our days, the way we bring up our children. And these are the skills that are very much needed on the front line. I call it a hand up, not a handout. I hate handouts. Handouts create beggars. They create dependency. And as I relate some of the stories today, you'll see why I'm so passionate about what I do. Now, there's certain times in our lives when we remember exactly where we were when the event took place. For me, it was when Princess Diana died, when the Twin Towers fell, and when the Asian tsunami happened back on Boxing Day 2004. And I remember clearly seeing this disaster unfold on my computer screen. Waves of 100 foot high, 230,000 dead, affecting 14 countries. And there was one thought, and one thought only I had as I saw this disaster unfold, was that I must go. So I bought a one-way ticket from Tashkent in Uzbekistan directly to Phuket in Thailand. I jumped in a taxi and started to wend my way to the worst hit village, which was a small village called Ban Nam Kem. And as the taxi started to head that way, the scenery got worse and worse. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off. Cars were thrown to the tops of trees, resorts crumpled like matchboxes, glass everywhere. And as I saw this getting worse and worse, I said to the driver, "You're just going to have to stop a minute while I regroup." And I got out of the taxi and I walked to the edge of the cliff. And I looked over. And I wished I hadn't. Because in the sea, along with all the debris, were also dead bodies. Many of them. So as I came back from the cliff edge, I collapsed. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. My heart was pounding. And all I could think of was how quickly can I get out of this country? The smell of decomposing bodies in hot, humid Thailand was too much. And as I lay there on the ground, my nursing matron appeared before me. And I saw her standing there in her starched white apron and her rather stern face. And she said to me, "Nurse, it's not about you. You are here to serve. You are here to contribute. You are here to make a difference." And as I heard her words and I was transported back to myself as a young junior nurse, I pulled myself together and I got back in the taxi. We drove on to the largest survivors camp in Ban Nam Kem, 5,000 Thai people put together in a tented compound. I snuck into the communal tent, not really knowing what I would find the next morning. When I got up as a nurse, I went straight to the first aid tent and started to help people with these massive wounds. Can you imagine having a washing machine being thrown into your side? Terrible, terrible injuries. But as I was standing there with the nurses and doctors, there was one little girl, about 8 years old, and she kept pulling and pulling at my trouser leg. And I said to the doctors, do we have any idea what's happened to her? And they said, bit by bit, we're piecing together her life. And it appears she's lost every pillar of her life. Her parents, her brothers, her sisters, her teachers, her religious leaders, all gone. But she was pulling and pulling at my trouser leg, so obviously she wanted to show me something. So she took me off to an area where the children are penned. Now, when a disaster happens in the third world, as soon as the good people arrive, the UN, the Red Cross, save the children, so do the bad people. In fact, they usually arrive quickly, more quickly. So the sex traffickers, people kidnapping the children for prostitution, arrive immediately. The adult carers are totally distracted, the ones that have survived. So they're not minding their children properly. So these wonderful volunteers had put a lovely creche together, and they were there helping the children to heal their grief. And they started with art therapy. And when I looked at these paintings, they were black. The outpouring of grief was unbelievable. But as I stood there and I thought, really, these children are so little, they have to start to heal at some point. How can we do that? And I got a text message from my father. Now, my father never knows where I am in the world, but they assumed that I'd gone. But it set off a whole chain of thought, because my father is a magician. My grandfather's a magician, and in fact, I'm a magician. So watch out for your wallets. But I realized that magic didn't need any translation, and we needed to get them to smile again. So within 3 weeks, we had a magician on the front line, resplendent in his waistcoat and his dicky bow, and he was the Pied Piper. The children followed him around, shouting abracadabra. You could see the parents just relax their shoulders for 2 minutes as he came in and made a rabbit appear or disappear. He stepped out of his comfort zone, this magician, and walked into one of the worst disasters we've had for many, many years. But the ripple effect of good deeds. So as I was there on the front line doing my work, I had a call from Winston Churchill's granddaughter, Arabella Churchill. And she said, Linda, I hear you've got a magician on the front line. And there was a long pause, and I was waiting for her to say, are you crazy? And she said, I've got a mobile circus. Can I bring it out? And for 3 months, I had stilt walkers, jugglers, and clowns roaming up and down this worst hit area where the tsunami hit. So when I talk about volunteers and volunteering and my experience of volunteers in a disaster, I am a huge advocate. When I was in Thailand after the tsunami, the volunteers got there quicker than many government agencies. They got on flights and they arrived. 6,000 volunteers arrived within the first couple of months from 51 different countries. The power of one. And incredibly, these 6,000 people, they self-organized. They didn't come through the Red Cross. They didn't come through any set-up charity. They came and they organized themselves. We had everything from construction workers, from physiotherapists, from magicians to stilt walkers. We also had the huggers. They're just as important. When people have such a bad emotional experience, the last thing they want to be is abandoned. It was also very good for the economy. People came, they bought food. If there was anywhere to stay, they stayed in someone's house and paid for it. But they worked and they worked hard. On Phi Phi Island alone, 4,000 volunteers moved 290 tons of debris from the sea and the beach. Those volunteers were essential workers. They started as young as 18 years old and went up to 75 years old. An incredible outpouring of practical compassion. While I was out there, my big thing, my main reason for being in these areas is to help people have a hand up, not a handout, as I said earlier. And when I was in this survivors camp, and the moment comes when the big aid agencies leave, the big emergency agencies are only there 8 to 12 weeks maximum, and then they go. So the people have survived, but they've lost everything. They don't have homes, they don't have a way of feeding themselves, they're in these survivors camps, and all the big agencies leave. And they got to one point when I remember so vividly, this mother coming up to me, and with outstretched hands, she said, "Linda, please take my baby. I can no longer feed her." And I looked her straight in the eye, and I said, "I will not feed your baby. But I promise you, I will enable you to feed your own baby." So this is when I then mobilize people like yourselves to help me solve this problem. And at the time, I went back up to Bangkok and I gathered business leaders together and I set them a challenge. And I said, we have people who have lost everything. They're low educated. They're the bellboys, the gardeners, the cleaners from the hotels. And the hotels are not being rebuilt. How can we get them earning money as fast as possible? And I said to them, I don't want your money, but I want you. And will you come with me to the front line for 2 days? That's all I require. And I want you to come and be with the people, talk to the people, listen to the people, look at the geography. And this is your challenge, is to come up with ways that they can earn money now. Now, I love working with people like yourselves because business leaders, people who know the value of money and how we survive through it, they're not going to suggest, why don't you make 10 cushion covers and maybe we will sell them? Never. It'd be too embarrassing. It would fail. So I gave them this challenge and they went back to Bangkok. Within 1 week, I got a call and they said, yes, we found the solution. I said, what is it? They said, where the wave hit, it didn't go as far as the acres and acres of rubber trees that also line the coast. And their grandparents would have harvested this rubber. It's a business that's viable for the next 10 years. And all they need is a coconut shell, a knife to scour the tree, and a mangle, which costs $200 US. Within 4 months, they were earning 3 times what they ever earned within the hotel industry. It was that immediate. A hand up, not a handout, bringing back self-esteem, independence, and dignity. I love volunteers. But some of you might wonder how I ever got started on this crazy journey, which I'm so passionate about. I sold absolutely everything I own. 13 years ago, when I realized that my dad was cutting the grass at home and I was never there, I thought it's time just to let everything go. So for the last now 13 years, I have lived out of 1 suitcase and 1 suitcase only, which is currently here in Christchurch. I don't own a car or a house or a book or a painting. But how did it all start? Well, basically, I met my Prince Charming at 16 years old. At age 20, I was married. At age 24, I had 2 wonderful children, Gail and Graham. At the age of 28, I was divorced. So I fast-tracked through that part of my life. But what I did, and I don't recommend this at all to you, but I realised that once I was divorced, that I wasn't going to have maintenance from my husband. I was going to be superwoman, and I was going to manage all on my own. Don't do that. But it also made me realise that my nursing would never pay the money that I needed to take care of my children the way I wanted to. It was never going to pay. So I decided I had to look for another type of job. And at the time, the pharmaceutical industry was wanting nurses to come into their community. And so basically I went because I could see the company car, the subsidised mortgage, all these dollar signs. And I thought, oh, I'm going to achieve everything I need to for my kids and take care of myself. For the first time and the first time only, I took a job for money. And I'd done the job for 3.5 years, and I came home at night and I had the extra glass of wine, or I cried myself to sleep, but I thought, doesn't matter. I'm ticking all the boxes for my family and everything is good. But stress catches up on you. And one day I was driving from the north of England to the south of England on a dark winter's night at 3 o'clock in the morning. And stabbing pain started to happen behind my eyes. And the curtains came down and I went blind. And I sat on the hard shoulder, just distressed. My life was over. I would never see my children again. I would never work again. I was so angry. Why me? What have I done? And as I sat there and I started to pray to a God I hadn't thought about for a very long time, I made a promise. And my promise was that if my sight comes back, that I would follow my heart and my soul, and I would find my purpose, why I was born, what I was here, why I was born, why am I living? And I went home to my children and I told them that I'd had this awful experience, now classified as hysterical blindness or stress blindness. And I said, we've got to change something here, because I realised I'd become the most negative person out. I was the person who would moan constantly. Oh, it's a really bad day today. Oh, no, it's going to be worse tomorrow. Well, at the weekend, it's going to thunder. The negativity just went on and on and on. So I said to my poor children, there's 3 words we're not saying anymore, and the words are no, not, and don't. Teenage children, those 3 words, doesn't really go together. So we had a swear box that every time we said it, we put our money in the pot. That year we had a very good holiday. My children were not old enough for me just to leave home. They were 14 and 16. But as the time went by, I was realising what I was born to do. And the day came when my son Graham came to me and said, Mum, it's time for me to go in the army. And my daughter Gail came to me and said, Mum, it's time for me to go to university. So I sat down with them on the sofa and I said, can I leave home now? Because I'd realised what I wanted to do. I didn't want to work in safe, sanitised England. I wanted to work in the hellholes of the world, where there's no social security, where there's no financial security, and really help the people on the edges of life. And that was when I sold everything and realised it was time for me to go and find my mission on life. But as I look back and I think about the different places I've been and where I've been very successful, because I have learnt a few things about being a volunteer on the front line. And probably the most challenging country I've ever worked in is Pakistan. And I was there during Benazir Bhutto's assassination, the Red Mosque siege, the Marriott bomb blast. And when I left Thailand, the land of smiles, and I walked into Pakistan and arrived at Karachi airport, there was one thing that was really missing, and I couldn't quite fathom out what it was. And it was, there were no men. No men visible at all. All the men were out in the streets and the women were back in their houses. But I learned to do the job and to be a good player in that country by wearing the moccasins of the country. And anyone who wants to volunteer in any capacity outside of your own culture, it's the only way to go. And before you take that leap of faith, the first thing we all have to do, wherever we're born in the world, is to actually look at ourselves and to look at our own filters. Because wherever you're born, you've been programmed by your government, by the society, by your teachers, by your parents, by the environment you've grown up in. And to be able to help another community, you have to really clean your glasses and get fresh and really live, breathe, and be in that country. So when I was in Pakistan, and it was time for me to go to the very front line, because my business leaders there, when I was trying to encourage them to come with me, they said, absolutely not. If we come with you to the front line, we'll be kidnapped, our kids will be held to ransom. It won't work, but we will support you to go. So I had a lovely driver at the time, and he said, Madam, it's time to go burqa shopping. So he took me into a burqa shop in Islamabad. Quite hard to find a burqa for me, being so tall, but finally he did. And me, determined to wear the moccasins of the country so that I could go out as a woman in society, I needed to be fully covered up with just my eyes showing. So I got dressed up and made sure everything was in the right place, and I walked down to my driver, and as I walked towards him, he looked at me and his jaw dropped open. And he said, Madam, you are so beautiful. He could not see me in my Western clothes. I'd been with him for 6 months, and until it was just my eyes, it was not possible. So wearing the moccasins of the country is incredible. When I then look back to other pivotal moments of my volunteering was when I was working with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Tibet. And he asked me to come and meet with him to share the project that I was doing with Tibetan refugees. But all the time that I was with him, I could see there was another such thing he wanted to ask me. So I was quite cool, and he said, yes, you're a nurse and we really need your help. He said, in the high Himalayas, 15,000 feet up, inside Tibet, where Tibetans can now no longer go back into, he said, we have the highest infant mortality in the world. And we found out the reasons. There's 3 reasons, and it's all just health education. But we need volunteers to go to this area to be able to share the messages. And so I wanted to reach into my case to get my diary out to see if I was free to go, as the Dalai Lama was looking at me, asking me to go. So I just said yes. You don't say no to the Dalai Lama. But it was a very interesting situation, because basically, if anyone knows anything about Tibetan nomads, they literally have what they stand up in. The men wash on New Year's Day, the women wash on New Year's Eve. They don't smell, but they're a bit crusty. But they literally have what they stand up in, and that's it. And so it hangs around a belt on their waist. Now, up in the high Himalayas, 15,000 feet up, nothing grows. So the people survive on yak meat. As Buddhists, they kill once a year, and then they dry the meat. So for 11 months, they have dried yak meat. And as I say, they just have what they stand up in, and they have just one knife that hangs on their belt. Now, this knife they use to cut the yak meat. They also use it to cut the umbilical cord. And they were killing their own families without being aware of it. Now, I call this know the context and know how to influence. Now, if I had gone in and said, a tall blonde lady from London, you are killing your children, you need to sterilize that knife, this is crazy, what are you doing? They would think, what does she know? She's from London, she doesn't know anything about this. We're nomads, we've lived here forever. So we had to share the message. Me, and I had volunteers, doctors and nurses came with me. So we had to find the most trusted leader in the community. And in this community, it's monks. So we told the monks the problem and why the children were dying. And they said, okay, we'll help you. So they said to the mums, when you're pregnant, bring an additional knife with you to the monastery. We will pray over it for 1 day. We will wrap it in a sacred scarf. And then you pop it in your pocket. Success rate, 100%. We used the right influence of the community. They listened, they understood, and they applied. But I love to see how volunteers and contribution can have such an incredible effect in all areas of our life. Because volunteers, when they then go to get a job, often they are more favourable. If they've seen that people have had the strength and resilience to give and contribute and be overseas, it can help you get above the competition to get a job. It actually raises your happiness levels when you contribute. Because there's 6 basic human needs, but the greatest human need is contribution. We all know how good it feels when we help anyone do anything. But when I was in Thailand after the tsunami, it was quite interesting because KPMG, which is a big insurance company, came to me and said, we want our staff to volunteer 1 day a month for 6 months. So this is great. So I put them to work straight away. Off they were, helping, clearing up, constructing houses, constructing boats. 6 months later, the KPMG chair came back to Bangkok and he sat his staff down and he said, thank you, you've done a great job, brilliant job. But something really strange has happened since you've been volunteering. Our productivity has gone up. They were working less hours, but they felt so good about what they were doing. You could see in all their little booths, they had the children they were helping, that their actual productivity had gone up. So you can imagine, I'm sharing this with companies all the time. Another amazing thing happened, and that's why I've dedicated my life to be out in the world to share stories like this, because when the Thailand Asian tsunami happened, I'd been there about 3 months, and I got a call from the head of Cadbury's. Cadbury's is the big, Cadbury Schweppes, the chocolate people. And they were due to have their annual conference in Mexico. 120 country managers from all over the world were coming together in Mexico to have their conference. And bless their hearts, do you know what they did? They relocated that conference to Phuket. When everyone else was running away, 120 country managers from Cadbury Schweppes decided to change the location and go into the disaster area. And I got a call from the top guy, and he said, can you facilitate 120 country managers to make a difference in 3 days? Of course, I said. Because I got them using their marketing skills, their accounting skills. They were working with the fishermen. They were helping to train them to how better market the fishing trips they used to take, the boat trips they used to take, to design the sign, to say, tourists really like a life jacket, so if you invest in a life jacket, you're going to get more tourists coming to your boat. It was common sense. It was communication skills. It was basic financial literacy. But they made a huge difference on those 3 days that they were there. So when you have the opportunity to volunteer, be aware that some of the places you go into could be dirty and messy and not very well organised. You've been through it all yourselves here. You know what it's like in the time of an earthquake. You also know how people self-organise. An example from the university, of course, is the Student Volunteer Army. People who couldn't quite find a place of how they could help in Christchurch, but still jumped in and just got on with it. I'm an advocate of jumping in. Also, you must be aware of hazards. You must be aware that you are not a burden to the community. So go with your tent, go with your ration packs in case they don't have enough resources. That is really, really important. And also with volunteering, you don't have to do as I did and sold everything and go to the far-flung places of the world. As you know, volunteering in a disaster can happen in your own country as it's happening right now. And still you're in the recovery phase. Because as you guys know very well, media defines disaster. When the spotlight comes off you, everyone thinks you're okay. It's the same in the third world. But I'm a real advocate of practical compassion, of paying it forward, of random acts of kindness. And that's what we as human beings are all about, whether we're volunteers or not volunteers. And just for a moment, I would love you to take a second to think about someone in your life, whether it's when you were 5 years old or yesterday, who gave you a random act of kindness, who made that extra cup of coffee for you, who babysat for you when you really needed that night out, who smiled at you on the bus, could have completely changed your day. When that person pops into your mind, just say a thank you to them. And equally, in the next week or so, commit to paying it forward. Commit to passing it on. Now, I had the most amazing experience the other day when I was coming through Auckland Airport, and I had a really busy day, and I'd rushed through security, and all I wanted was a glass of wine. When I got through security, it was this Air New Zealand area where you could only go in if you had a ticket, a gold card or something, and I didn't have that. So I was standing next to the Air New Zealand man, and I said, is there any chance I can get it? I've had a really hard day. I thought, I'm a real charmer, I'll get through it, I know. I'm a frontline worker, come on, use all your skills. And the Air New Zealand man was very severe. He had a very straight face, he was not happy about this. So as I loitered there thinking, oh, some magic will happen, let's just wait and see. And as I looked around, this man walked past me, and he walked straight into the lounge, and he said, she's with me. The Air New Zealand man was not amused. And he looked at this guy and he said, okay, so what's her name? And he said, Penelope. And I followed him straight into the lounge and we had that glass of wine. So I am a great advocate of paying it forward and that random act of kindness. I tell you, I've had some adventures and misadventures, but some glasses of wine as well. But I really say to you, whether you're 33 or 93, don't sleepwalk through life. Don't walk the same path 80 days in a row. Don't be that sheep in the middle of the herd. Because ultimately, you come with nothing and you go with nothing. And at the end of the day, all you have is your story. So I encourage you to make yours a great one. Now I'm going to show a small video that was shot on the front line, and then I would love to have some questions, but the first person has to ask me what's inside my suitcase. So let's see if we can do this.